And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand in his side, I will not believe." 8 days later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. The doors were shut, but Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not be faithless, but believing." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Please be seated. For 6 years, my family and I lived in Cooperstown, New York, which is the legendary birthplace of baseball, or so the story goes. So as an origin story goes, as an account of what happened at the beginning, you can't get much better than the story that developed about the beginnings of baseball. And what it said was that on a beautiful summer day in 1839, in this beautiful small town, a young man named Abner Doubleday laid out a diamond on the edge of an apple orchard and drew together the youths of the community and said they were going to play this new game. And it was all for fun. No money was involved, and it was in this beautiful small town. And basically, the story of baseball ever since has been constantly, declining, rolling down the hill from this glorious beginning. Right? Well, in fact, none of this is true. Baseball, Abner Doubleday was not in Cooperstown, New York in 1839, and the man who found the ball up in his attic that's at the center of the Baseball Hall of Fame ended his life in an insane asylum. And baseball probably, almost certainly, developed in England, of all places, as a sort of version of rounders, which is a stick and ball game that's been played since the time of the Tudors. And it became popular in America in the cities, where they played it in the vacant lots next to factories, not in kind of beautiful rural places. And ever since the beginning, money and cheating have been in this kind of devil's dance with the high ideals of the game. And so, baseball may be a beautiful game, and it may be an integral part of what it means to be an American, but from the beginning it's been played by flesh and blood people, which means that it's complicated, right? Now, we have this tendency about things that we really love or that are important to us, that we think that they must have been even more wonderful at the beginning, and that the mess that they are now it must be declining from the start. What do we call this tendency that we have?
Pessimism.
What? This idea that it must have been better at the beginning and it's good. We call this nostalgia, right? Sort of thinking back. And we are prone to nostalgia in all sorts of parts of our life. We think about sort of our spouse and wasn't it so wonderful back when we fell in love so long ago and it was perfect then? Or we think about, our work and when I was first there, started on it, wasn't it just terrific? You might think about your school this way. The first day was so exciting and I had all these wonderful friends and now it's such a mess. We're prone to kind of look to the beginnings and think it must have been perfect then, right? And there's not all bad. I mean, it's part of a way of kind of judging the way things are now, and it can be an impetus to improve things. But ultimately, it's often not really true. And the further away we get from the origins, the easier it is to become nostalgic about what might have been once upon a time. So we're on the second Sunday of the Easter season. And one of the things that we celebrate in the Easter season is incontestably glorious, which is that Jesus Christ rose on the third day from the dead. And he came up in his flesh and he revealed to us the glories of the world to come. And that is absolutely true and it is absolutely wonderful and there's nothing that can compare to it in the works of God. But we also look back in this season to the foundation of the church. And we have a tendency sometimes to romanticize the beginnings of the church, that everything in the beginning must have been perfect, and everybody must have gotten along right well, and they must have all agreed in the truth. And there are places in the life of the early church that were truly beautiful and profound, and that have continued to inspire Christians down the ages. But also, we have to remember that the early church was formed out of people like us, flesh and blood people, who were full of their own follies and their own sins, and who disagreed and who had trouble grasping all that God had done for them when he raised Jesus Christ from the dead. And we see this in today's gospel lesson. Jesus, the evening of the resurrection, the evening of Easter Day, he comes to look for his disciples, and where are they? They're huddled in a room afraid. 11 of them, or 10 of them, 10 of them. Thomas is somewhere else. We're not told where he is. But when they tell him about what they've received, what Jesus has done for them, he doesn't believe them. So you have faith and doubt fear and doubt at the very beginning of the life of the church. And yet Jesus appears and he assures and he strengthens and he sends them out. Nonetheless, despite the failings and weaknesses of the people he's called to serve them, he still has a purpose and a mission for them. And we see this also in the first epistle of John. We're going to be reading the first epistle of John all 7 Sundays of Easter this year. So I wanted to just give you a kind of little insight into this. This is in the same way that the book of Acts, which is very dramatic and full of life and energy, the book of Acts is a successor to the Gospel of John, Gospel of Luke. 1st and 2nd and 3rd John are the successors to the Gospel of John, written by the same person, probably addressed to the same congregation. But in the epistles of John, there are real problems in the church. There are people who've come to believe in false things about who Jesus was, that he's not really come in the flesh, that his cross was not really important. There are people saying that they have no sin. That was one of the big focuses in the reading that was just read to us, who claim that they don't need the forgiveness that Christ has come to extend. There are people who may be doing all sorts of nefarious things that ought not be mentioned. There are people, a group has broken away from the body of the church to form their own little congregation, and they're trying to draw people into their group, and there's bickering and hostility back and forth. It's a mess, right? Even though these are the people whose church was founded by the beloved disciple, the one who went out, Jesus' most close and intimate friend, the church that he's founded has trouble. And he writes this letter to try to pull them together and tell them the truth and help them to understand what should be at the heart of their life. But what's interesting is, he doesn't say, well, now you people, it was so wonderful when I was getting started and you've fallen so far away. There's no nostalgia at all in the epistles of John. There's no sort of, I'm the boss and you all need to jump into line. There's also no sense of, well, we can all believe whatever we want to and it doesn't really matter. We'll all live together in peace. He's very clear about the truth that must be received, and he's very clear about the call to live in love and to do God's will in the world. But he sort of focuses on pointing them back to Jesus throughout this letter, which makes it one of the most theologically rich of all the writings of the New Testament. And we see insistently that he talks about why it was so important that Jesus Christ came in the flesh, and why his death on the cross is such a central part of what God is doing through him. And he talks about the need that we all have to turn to him seeking forgiveness, that he is the source of cleansing, and that righteousness and peace with God comes from him. So he doesn't look to the failings of the church in the present or the past for his hope. He looks to Jesus who gives us strength, who brings us mercy, who helps us to live together in love with each other. So we do not do well to look back on some golden age that never existed when we run across the inevitable fear and doubt and struggle that's always at the life of the church. We do well to look instead to Jesus, who has risen and who comes to bring us what we need to live together as obedient and faithful people. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.